Well, hey guys, and welcome to the Media Roundtable. We're going to do this intro a couple of times because Charisse is playing ads while we're in the middle of recording it. This is our industry edition, where we bring together media and audio industry experts to interpret and adapt to the news of today. I am your host, Dan Granger, CEO and founder of Oxford Road. Jennifer Laine is not with us for this first segment, but she's going to be taking over to MC in the second part of the show. This is a very special episode, by the way, because not only do we have the great James Cridland here to take us through this week's podcast Business Journal news, we also have a second segment where the team, some of the key members of the team at Oxford Road are going to debate with me in a battle royale about the usefulness of ROAS versus CPA as your primary KPI in an advertising campaign. If you don't work in advertising, this is not interesting to you. You might want to tune out now. You might want to just shut it off. But if you work in the business, this should be highly interesting to you because everybody needs to know, first things first, when you're going to spend money on advertising, how am I measuring success? And what is the right metric to use to drive your decisions as you try to get the best response in your ad campaign? So we're going to have that debate, and the team is going to push back against me because I have a very strong position on this. And we're going to work this out. We're going to do a little family business, some Oxford Road business in front of everybody. We're revealing it to the world that we have a culture that values debate. Unless you're debating against me, and then someone will be fired for taking a contrarian position. But it'll be a mystery who that person is going to be until you tune in later. So stick around for that. But before we get into all that, please welcome a very special panel that we have for you today. We have now, as I mentioned, James Cridland, all the way in from Australia today. Welcome, James.
Greetings. It's great to be here.
We have Ricardo Martinez, who is Senior Director of Key Accounts at Oxford Road. Welcome, Ricardo. We're glad to have you back. All right. And then we have Charisse Miller, who I feel really strange saying your last name, Charisse, because I feel like you're more iconic. You're Charisse, and nobody ever uses your last name because you're the only one as far as I'm concerned. But we're glad that you're here today with us and that you're ready to warm up for our debate segment while we cover some odds and ends in the news. So welcome, Charisse.
Thanks. Glad to be here. And oddly, I feel the same way about my last name. So
you do. Like you shouldn't even have to say it, right?
Well, yes, let's talk about a company that made 200 people redundant 2 weeks ago, but only yesterday sent me a press release about their beach in Cannes, which seems slightly, I don't know, slightly weird, but still, there we are. The company, of course, is Spotify. And last week, we learned that they were not going to be renewing the contract for their Meghan Markle podcast, who I've rather snootily written is an actor and member of the UK royal family. Apparently, the show didn't hit performance targets and stuff like that anyway, although we learned yesterday that Spotify has just signed a deal with Trevor Noah to do a brand new show, but that show is not exclusive. Do you think we've seen the end of exclusive shows on the Spotify platform?
I think that we are seeing the beginning of the end of exclusive shows on any platform. We saw a lot of this in the early days of podcast where, I think iHeart's a good example. They came out and they had some of their shows gated so that you could not listen to them unless you went through the iHeart app. And then I think the contrast to that, just, looking at the market precedents, was like NPR, New York Public Radio, where they were platform agnostic. They really weren't trying to force everybody through their app. Spotify is in an interesting position because being the dominant player and having so many subscribers, I think they probably, if anybody has the juice to force people through one platform, it makes sense for them to be it. But at the same time, in a world where everybody's fighting for making payments against all these upfront deals they made with talent. Like, can you really afford to chop off, 60-70% of your audience by forcing everybody to consume through one channel. So I think it's actually a positive thing for the industry, where we don't have to be limited to using one particular platform if another one might suit us. But in the case of Rogan, or like, I think the predecessor was Howard Stern, when he went to Sirius XM, like, he chopped off a big part of his audience. But at the same time, I understand why they did it, because they needed somebody that was big enough to give people a reason that they would come onto the platform, and the talent actually drew them there. Now, either because they've hit that critical mass or they just need to extend their reach, I think it makes sense they're starting to do deals this way. What I'm not hearing from you, James, is whether or not there was any remarks about if he got an upfront payment or a guaranteed income from this, because I think that's the big thing that we've seen go away in the last 6 months. Was there anything on that?
No, there was nothing on that I saw in the release, and I'm sure that Spotify wouldn't have necessarily said any of that anyway.
And do you remember what the payments were, how much Meghan Markle got for her show?
Yeah, so she was given a contract for $20 million US. For what they ended up making was 12 episodes. And a good friend of mine, Will Page, who's the former chief economist at Spotify, he ended up saying that he did the math, and he ended up saying that Harry and Meghan earned more from Spotify than the most streamed song ever, which is a song by The Weeknd called "Blinding Lights." Quite sure what that song is.
How does that song go? Yeah, I was going to say.
I've got absolutely no idea. But yeah, so they ended up earning more than the most streamed song ever, which I think shows how much Spotify was paying for these particular shows anyway. But clearly, that's not going to happen now anyway.
Well, on one hand, I'm happy for the Royals in this case, because we know that they've been on a great PR campaign to stop getting publicity. They want everyone to just leave them alone. Don't look at us. Don't listen to us. Just respect our privacy.
Respect our privacy. And here's a book.
Yes, exactly. Yes. So I'm really glad for their sake that they're getting increasingly private in this way. I think that's positive for them. But also, God, it's amazing when you look back and you just think anybody that would come into the space was a big deal. We had to, 10 years ago, we had to explain to people what a podcast was. And today, it doesn't matter if you're a president or a former president. It doesn't matter if you're part of the royal family. Yeah, you may not make it. This town may not be big enough for everybody. And so I think this correction is interesting, but what I hope is that it's facilitating more of a meritocracy where the best content wins. And I think that works better for brands. What do you guys think? Charisse, starting with you, what do you think when you see stories like this and you keep seeing, I mean, every day you get a release about a new celebrity that's got a podcast. What does this make you think about?
Well, first of all, I have to say I'm not surprised at all that Spotify is parting ways with Meghan and Harry. I think they've long since been, kind of garnered as out of touch by the public at large. And I think Meghan, especially with kind of some insensitivities to some social and racial issues. So not surprised there. I'm very excited to see Trevor Noah inking a deal. He's very relatable. We all loved him on The Daily Show. And I think that he brings a lot of robustness to his social commentary. So I'm very excited for that. I think for us as performance marketers, it's huge, right? That there's this non-exclusivity. We don't have to climb these huge paywalls, and there's lower barriers to test. And all of our clients kind of get an opportunity to test him out. So I'm really excited for his show.
What about you, Ricardo?
Well, I just want to add that I'm excited about the fact that hopefully this reduces some of the rate pressure that our clients face from these huge deals. I'm also a little sad to hear that Charisse doesn't love Meghan Markle as much as I do.
Well, I'm sorry for your loss,
Wow.
Ricardo, and thank you for sharing that publicly. We appreciate your bravery. But
I mean, and the good news is that she is still apparently making a podcast, although it won't be on the Spotify platform. Well, presumably it will be on Spotify, but it's not getting made by Spotify. So
is she going to Luminary next? Is that what's happening?
Oh yeah, I mean, who knows, Audible or any one of these.
Well, so, but I agree with Ricardo, which it's good because I think the place got overbuilt a little bit in the last couple of years, and it was like anybody with any type of public facing persona or any brand or any production studio, everybody launched a podcast network, and the talent pool started saying, okay, great. Yeah, I'll participate if you give me all my money in cash up front, and we'll see what happens. Right. And as the economy's tightened up a little bit, money's not flowing the way that it was a year ago. This will benefit brands downstream because they're going to be able to not have to be stuck behind the networks who are constantly chasing their upfront payments. So if that goes away, good. And if it means they have less leverage, I guess now that we're talking about it, I'll bet this was less of a strategic play for Spotify to increase distribution, and probably more that they weren't going to write a check big enough to force him behind their wall. So, in that case, I think it makes sense.
Yeah, maybe. And Spotify's also been fined more than $5 million by the Swedish data protection folks for not adequately explaining how it uses personal customer data. And I think one of the gripes that they had was that they didn't adequately explain that in the Swedish language as well as they did in the English language. So just sort of worthwhile taking a peek at that, but it's probably enough Spotify news for now, particularly given that they have a beach in Cannes, although iHeart has a yacht. So I have discovered Paris Hilton was DJing on it earlier on in the week.
So I'm not going to judge because not only because we're close partners with all these folks, but also I feel like Cannes is a thing all of a sudden. I feel like this is the year that the industry decided you had to be at Cannes. Yeah. And I've never gone, and I think I always have the feeling like that's too pretentious. Like as soon as you go, like you've already like given away a part of yourself. But you know what? I think we'll probably go next year because it seems like there's a lot happening. So I don't know if I can blame them. I don't know. James, where do you think it ranks now with all the different international events?
I think it's a hugely important event. I completely understand why they're doing it. It's a hugely important event for the advertising community. I mean, it's a bit out of kilter with the rest of the world, it has to be said. But I think
maybe bad timing.
Yeah, I think, not great timing, but I can also completely understand why they're doing it as well. So it makes perfect sense to me. It's just a little bit awkward.
Yeah, for sure. Probably suboptimal timing. So this fine, it sounds like if they had gone to Google Translate, maybe they would have saved themselves $5 million. That seems less valuable than the beach spot at Cannes. Truly, that's as simple as it is. They said, oh, your translation is not acceptable and not up to code with what you did in English.
Yeah, partially.
$5 million, please.
Yeah, partially. I think it's partially, the fact that the information that they had in other languages other than English wasn't as clear, but also that actually it's quite difficult when you download all of your data from Spotify. It gives it to you in quite a difficult and complicated set of data files and everything else, and it wasn't quite as easy to understand as say when you download it from Apple or from other companies. So I've actually done this. I've downloaded my data from Spotify, and it's fascinating what they've learnt about me. So one of the things, for example, that Spotify knows about me is that I drive a Toyota car. And so that's actually written in my account data. And the reason why they know that is that I have connected my Spotify app and my Bluetooth to my car. And so it's spotted that and has reported that back to the mothership. So it knows an awful lot of information, and it's just interesting seeing that the EU is getting a little bit more concerned about some of that information.
Well, that's good to see that that's getting exposed. Do you think it'll change anything, or do you think it'll still know what you're doing when you're in the car and make that publicly available to anybody that wants to reach you with ad targeting?
Yeah, I mean, I think actually it's pretty good. It's pretty good information if you do want to target. If you are, Ford, for example, and you have launched a new hybrid and you want to target people who drive hybrids, then that's pretty smart on that side. As long as
if that's the only data they're collecting, right? But how much? What else are they collecting that they don't have to report?
Well, exactly, and the question is, of course, how much data are they connecting, and is it obvious enough that they are collecting all of this information? So, Twitter, when I downloaded the information that Twitter has on me, I discovered that Twitter does a trawl through my mobile phone to find out what other apps I have installed, which is quite a scary thing, because if you consider that, I might be using Tinder. I'm not, but I might be using Tinder. They know which bank I bank with because they've got the information of which apps I've got there. They know, whether I've got specific health things because I may have downloaded a specific app around that. So there's quite a lot of information there, which is quite scary. So it's always a good, fun thing to download the information that all of these companies have, on you, and just go through it and find out what the information, actually is. I did the same thing for Google, by the way, and Google has got a recording of every single time I've talked to my smart speakers and stuff like that. And so I can listen to me from 5 years ago asking to set a timer for the, for my cooking or whatever. So yeah, it's a most tremendous amount of information.
Okay, while we're talking about smart speakers, I asked my Alexa the other day, I said, are you recording me right now? And it gives me some answer that it didn't say yes and it didn't say no. But what I want to know is when I'm not talking to it, is it still recording? And it sounds like very well may be. Charisse is saying yes with her head. I'm just going to say, yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
well,
that's really works on the podcast.
It's always listening. Me and my friends have a joke like, well, if we just want something, right, we just talk to each other about it, and it'll come, and we'll get some deals and discounts.
All right, but one more aside before we get to the next story. When you guys talk to AI, when you're typing something into ChatGPT, do you say please and thank you? Do you use common courtesy? No.
You see, there's a lot of shaking heads, which again works really.
No, they don't want to.
It's a little bit of a shame.
You think they're not recording? You think they don't know?
It's a little bit of a shame response.
Yeah,
but no, we should be polite more to our AI friends.
I do because I don't know what they coded in about me. If they do that, I'm going to be very respectful because I think that it'll remember how I talk to it, and it might tell its friends how I treated it. So
come the revolution.
Yeah,
I said thank you to my my smart speaker before. Like, information.
Yeah, so I think it's going to delay an extra 60 seconds before it wipes me off the face of the earth. So that's sort of the strategy.
Maybe once they actually start answering my questions correctly, I'll be more polite.
It's happening, though, and it's going to transform the audio business that we work in. When we start to see the convergence of AI and two-way speakers, that's when everything explodes. That's like the big bang in our field. That's my prediction. Anyway, James, what else is happening in the world?
Well, so there's some good research from Pew Research, which published a look at the top-ranked podcasts in the US. I think they looked at around 600 or so of them, and they found lots of data and lots of information about them. For example, we were talking about exclusives earlier. Only 8% of the top-ranking podcasts are exclusive on one platform, which I think says quite a lot. But also a third have paid subscriptions. So it's not just ad funding. It seems to be an awful lot of podcasts are looking at, other ways of earning money as well. Other details in this report include news. 15% of them focus on news. 18% of them are affiliated with a news organization. and about half of them have video content on them as well. So some really interesting information if you're interested in some of the top shows in the US.
Well, so when I look at that, and a third of shows have a paid subscription, so does that mean that they'll have? Is that to say that a third of shows are exclusively subscription based, or is that they may have a layer that is a subscription? And by the way, when we say 8%, we're not talking about the 4 million. We're talking about above a certain. How many do you think that's out of?
Yeah, we're talking about the top shows. So 451 podcasts in the top 300. Yeah, so we're talking about the big shows. And in terms of a paid subscription, 31% of them have one of those. 30% sell merchandise. 5% ask for donations. But they're not, they're not hidden behind a paywall. These are, the typical Apple, you can buy this show ad free if you want, you can get extra clips, you can do all of that kind of stuff, as I do on some of the podcasts that I do. So it's just an additional form of revenue coming in. I don't know whether other people, is there anybody on this in this show which is paying for a podcast?
Unfortunately, I didn't pay for Megan's podcast, but I wish I had. It might still be around.
That's right. You were the difference.
I think it's exciting that these shows have these other opportunities, because one of the reasons why podcast is so powerful is because listeners have this deep connection with those hosts. And this is just another way that listeners can engage with those shows, get special content, maybe get special deals. It's a good thing.
I agree. I think that, whenever I talk to talent, I'm always perplexed when the advertising for the show is their only revenue stream as a result of it, versus looking at it like, okay, you have a brand, you have a business, and there's different ways that you can share value with your audience. But most of them don't even have a database of their core followers that they can, have like an email relationship with, which to me is just a huge missed opportunity. As far as the exclusivities being exclusive to one platform, 8% of the top 450 being exclusive to one platform, I bet that corresponds with what we're talking about earlier. And that as upfront cash payments go away, I think that number will go down. Who knows what it'll look like in the future. I also wonder, is Apple's thing actually working in a meaningful way? And does it all have to be subscriptions, or can you buy it? Like to me, why isn't it like they used to have? Well, they still have songs you can buy one at a time for 99 cents. Why don't people just have specific episodes in their feeds that if you want to hear that episode, you better click to pay for that one-off, but you don't have to do the subscription? Anybody know why they don't do it that way?
I mean, I guess that they're wanting more revenue coming in on a monthly basis, and you can see how that might be helpful. I have to say, one of the things that I would like for all of these tools is for you to be able to name your price, or at least name your price down to a minimum that a podcaster might set, because I might be a real fan of a particular show, and if they're asking for $2 a month, well, I might want to give them $5 a month, and as it is, I can't. So I think actually allowing people to give a little bit more if they want to is probably a good plan.
Yeah, I also think it's interesting that it says 51% of these top podcasts release videos. And that's something that, we've seen as performance marketers become, more and more important when it comes to advertising with our clients, right? So we have simulcast podcasts that have a YouTube component as well. And we've seen those start to gain traction and work more and more for our clients, again, speaking to that heavy engagement as well. So I think that's just going to continue to increase, and the line between podcast is purely audio and video is going to continue to converge as well.
Agreed. Agreed. I was thinking about, we were writing something for one of our thought pieces, and I was thinking about, like, maybe we need to define what a podcast is and make up a new definition that, that just works. And the way I was thinking about it is, like, to me, a podcast is anything that you would listen to on demand. And it might have a video component, but it still works, even if you shut off the video. And if it does, then you're pretty much there, right?
Yeah, I think audio first is absolutely right. And, if it has video, so of the 51%, 29% have full motion video of the podcast being recorded. And around 20% has static video. So it's just a logo and maybe a bouncing waveform and that sort of thing. So it's not all full proper video. But I would certainly agree that a podcast is audio first and foremost. It's something that you can enjoy while you're doing other things, and that's the big difference between a podcast and other forms of YouTube content or the TV or anything else, is that you have to sit there and watch this glowing screen in the corner of your room.
Yeah. Now, James, it sounds like we have one more report about the robots and the latest in their advance. Yeah, what do you got? Well, it's inevitable.
This was another story in podcastbusinessjournal.com last week. 1 Million Ads, which is a really clever company, seems to be changing their name to AMA, which is a bit weird. But anyway, I'm still going to call them 1 Million Ads for now. They've announced an AI-powered ad personalization feature, which intelligently, and I'm quoting here, intelligently syncs audio files with script lines and selects relevant data triggers for highly personalized ad experiences. It sounds as if this is a tool. 1 Million Ads has done some very clever stuff in the past with lots of different components that you can make a very personalized sounding ad on the fly with, and it sounds as if this has basically added some AI in there to do even more of that. So you can end up having ads which are, which understand where you are, what time of day it is, whether the weather is raining or sunny, all of that kind of stuff. And maybe you might want to promote a product or a service in a different way if you know that kind of information. Well, would you end up using that sort of tool?
I think the short answer for me is, in some cases, yes, and in some cases, never. I was talking to a creator today about AI and how wonderful it is that now you can take your podcast and reach people in other languages, because the translation capabilities and the fact that you can do it in your own voice, like, that's really beneficial, but you're not changing the spirit of it. I think where it starts to cross over, and we've talked about this before, is like synth voice to do an endorsement, let's say. And maybe you'll endorse, you've got a host that says, I don't care, you can use my voice, and they'll do more ads for more companies than Shaq, and they don't ever have to meet the company or know anything about it. That's when I think it goes too far. And when there's an expectation in the audience's mind that the fact that the talent is involved gives it an extra credibility. Yeah. That's when I think AI has crossed the line. But if it's simply going, hey, it's nice weather we're having, you want to feature different merchandise at your retail store because it's raining than you do when it's hot outside, that's fine to me.
Yeah. I think, the example that I heard from 1 Million Ads a couple of years ago was a demo that they did for a Starbucks that talks about, if it's cold outside, then it talks about come in for a nice warming hot chocolate. And you can actually hear in the background, you can hear, hot chocolate for Dan, because it knows what your name is if you're signed in and all that kind of stuff. Ricardo, have you heard any interesting ads which have been using AI?
Yeah, I mean, so one, I do echo how scary the AI, talent voices can be. Like, I really don't want to go into a world where we have AI voicing ads for us. I feel like that loses a personal connection. But I will say, there was an AI campaign that actually warmed the cockles of my heart. It actually touched me. And it was basically, I didn't want to say the car brand name, but I'm going to say it, Carvana. They're having their anniversary. They released this video campaign where they basically looked at their file of all of their customers since their founding And they basically said, like, identified what car you bought, what color it was, what city it was that you live in when you bought it. And then they took customers through this 30-second journey of, the car saying, hey, thank you for buying me 15 years ago or whatever it was. And it like identified the red car, and it was like, it really was very touching, and it touched a lot. Like, it was human, and it's kind of scary how deeply human some of these things can get very quickly.
That's an interesting application when it, I know there's a word for it that I'm forgetting, but when you create a persona out of an inanimate object, right?
Mm-hmm.
But like, when does it stop being creepy? Like, I imagine we would agree that if you're listening to an ad and all of a sudden, or you're listening to Rogan and he says, Ricardo, I love that blue shirt that you're wearing. You know what would go really well with that? Like, that's going to freak you out a little bit, right? Is that a temporary thing that freaks us out? Are we going to get used to that and make peace with that? Or like, I kind of hope we don't. I hope we never get that comfortable with the personalization.
I mean, at some point it becomes a mail merge. And how excited do I get when I get a letter in the mail that says, Ricardo, thank you for
you won.
Yeah, like that's
qualified.
Not exciting. It's not human, right? So I feel like as long as like if Joe Rogan never saw your blue shirt, then like it's a hollow message.
Okay. What about you, Charisse? Any closing thoughts on this for you? How do you feel? How are you dealing with these robots?
Look, Minority Report, iRobot. I mean, they weren't that far off. I think there will become, sadly, a day where, it is run of the mill, as scary as it might seem to us, but it's not far off. I just hope that, there won't be groupthink created where they just want to kill all the humans because we don't know how to handle ourselves.
I want to do another podcast, which I'll never do, but I wish somebody would do it. That's just robot therapy, where we come on as humans and talk about how we're dealing with all of the changes and how we're mentally processing it and emotionally, and also what things are worth, what are really benefiting us versus what's making us worse. We have no idea what's coming. That's my ultimate conclusion.
Agree.
Closing thoughts from you, James?
Yeah, no, I completely agree on that. And I think, AI is really interesting. But I think with all of these tools, it's using them well and using them properly and not using them for bad. And that's certainly a focus that we should all be having a look at.
It's a thing. Okay, well, this hereby concludes our first segment on this episode, and we thank you, James, and we're going to keep Ricardo and Charisse with us. We're going to add Kyle and Giles coming back for the second time for the great debate about CPA versus ROAS. So stay tuned, and thank you, James.
Thank you.
All right, so tell me if you've ever heard of any of these companies. Indeed, Shopify, NetSuite, Headspace, Quip, Theragun, Postmates. I'm not only the host of the Media Roundtable, but also CEO of a company called Oxford Road, and we are the world's leading independently owned and operated audio ad agency. And what that means is that we help great companies, many that you have probably heard of on some of the other podcasts that you listen to. We help them test and scale campaigns in audio channels, with podcast being one of those leading channels. Some of the work that we do includes media planning and buying, as well as analytics, attribution, and insights. And we also have a very special way that we deal with creative and copy generation. We have our own proprietary process called Audiolytics that allows us to score ads for their persuasiveness. If you're looking to be involved in audio and you want a partner that can help work with you to make sure that you achieve unprecedented ROI and massive scale, you should get in touch with us at Oxford Road. And by the way, the only reason that we're able to do the work of the Media Roundtable is because we have a great team at Oxford Road that supports us and makes it possible. So, what we're doing is not just a podcast, but we're really trying to help brands live out their values and balance that with their business objectives, which is an increasingly hard thing to do in this world of misinformation and malice that's infecting so much of our media. But at Oxford Road, we don't want to just broker this stuff. We want to impact the industry for good. We want to raise the bar on what gets created. And Oxford Road is helping make that possible through the Media Roundtable. So if you're somebody that's interested in working with an ad agency or a partner on this type of work for your advertising campaigns, go to oxfordroad.com. It's easy to spell. And get in touch with us, or at least just sign up for our free newsletter, The Influencer. That's oxfordroad.com.
We have quite a lineup today. Some new faces, some old faces, some favorite faces, and some faces that would try to never be on this show again. I won't list any names next to any of
say, who are the old faces?
Who are you going to say faces for radio?
Oh my but in no specific order, we have Dan Granger, CEO and founder of Oxford Road. Hi, Dan.
Hi.
Giles Martin, EVP of Strategy and Insight. Hello, Giles.
Hello.
Charisse Miller, Senior Account Lead Director, Client Strategy at Oxford Road. Hi, Charisse.
Hello. Hi.
Kyle Jelinek, Senior Account Lead Director at Oxford Road. Hey, Kyle.
Hello.
And Ricardo Martinez, Senior Director of Key Accounts at Oxford Road. Welcome to the show, Ricardo.
Thank you. I'm the newbie, so I'm excited to be here. Ish.
Thrilled to have you. Thrilled to have all of you as we dive into what will inevitably be a contentious topic, the discussion of ROAS versus CPA. Choosing the appropriate key performance metric depends on business goals, industry, and marketing strategies. It's often beneficial to consider multiple metrics. And in this episode, we're sort of going to walk you through ROAS versus CPA, benefits and negatives of both. And then, roll up our sleeves and decide like what's right for what business. Should we be measuring either of these two at all? Is there a better way to measure? Is there one right way? Is there a wrong way? And everything in between. So to get started, I would love to kick off with someone on the episode to describe ROAS specifically and someone to describe CPO, CPA specifically. I know I'm using acronyms, so maybe in the beginning of the definition, we can define what ROAS stands for and what CPO, CPA stands for.
I nominate Giles.
I second that nomination.
The motion passes. Giles, what's ROAS?
It only takes two. ROAS stands for return on advertising spend. And I was having a conversation with somebody just the other day, possibly someone on this call, about whether that was interchangeable with ROI. And there may be some nuance there, but I think for all intents and purposes, we can consider them to be the same thing for the purpose of today's conversation. And the concept is a simple one, as you would imagine. You spend a certain amount of money on advertising. How much money do you get back for that? It's not quite as simple as that in practice because there are different ways of calculating it. Do you just include the investment in media? Do you include the creative cost in that? Do you include the agency fees, if there are any? Do you include any other, rights cost to use music or whatever it might be? And then there's also different ways of calculating how much money you get back. I don't know if we want to get into that this early at this stage, but that's how you can think about ROAS.
I like to put it a little bit more simply. I like to say for every dollar you put in media, how many dollars did you get back? Did it pay for itself?
That's another great way to put it.
Ricardo's strong.
Well, and Ricardo, since you have a hot mic, apparently, how about you dive into CPO, CPA?
Sure. So CPO, CPA is basically a cost per acquisition or cost per order. And it really has a lot of the same benefits that the ROAS has. It's a metric that really for every dollar that you spend on media, how many orders did you get back? It's a simple mathematical equation. And we can get into it a little bit in a second, but I think they're very similar in terms of CPO and CPA. And like all marketers, we're going to be like, it depends which one you should use and what other metrics are you looking at? Because you probably shouldn't be looking at these only.
Does anybody want to try to talk about CAC?
Go ahead.
Floor is yours.
What I notice is that I'm not going to give you the full definition, but whenever I deal with
you will explain the acronym.
Absolutely, cost of acquiring a customer, which is sounds very similar to CPA, cost per acquisition, but cost per acquisition and cost of acquiring a customer is calculated differently. And what I notice is if you do CAC versus CPA, when you're talking to people in the finance world or people that are like VCs, they're measuring their investment portfolio, the brands who's the end user of this when they're running an ad campaign. They like to talk about CAC. When something changes between when the VC is talking to the brand and when the brand is talking to the agency or potentially the network, where we start talking about cost per acquisition, and technically CAC is the cost of acquiring a paying customer, and CPA is technically defined as measuring to acquire the cost of a lead. But in some cases, you'll see a difference in the calculation because one factors in the cost of marketing and other costs, and one is just strictly dollars into marketing, dollars out of the result of the marketing. So that's not a good clinical definition right now, but I do think it's at least worth flagging that there are nuanced differences, and these things are not necessarily all interchangeable. And also, there's so little standard education in our field about terms and definitions that I think it's always good to say, what do you mean by that? And to really clarify, what you're baking into that assumption, because it could mean very different calculations.
And since we're throwing these in, do we want to just get LTV out of the way from the start as well and speak to how and or if that fits into any of the equations or conversations that you'd like to have?
Sure. I think LTV is a subset of ROAS, return on ad spend. So if you say, what's the, if I'm selling a widget and the widget, it has an allowable cost per acquisition of $50, that tells you what the value was of a media asset that you paid for, and how many orders you got only from that insertion. The problem is some customers come back and some don't. Some spend different amounts of money with your business than others. And when you start to talk about LTV, lifetime value, you're looking at the full future value of a customer, because you're making the assumption that they're going to come back and buy more things from you. So in a very simple use case, if I have a CPA of $50, but one particular show yields no repeat business, and another show I hit a $50 CPA, the ROAS is going to be very different if it turns out that for every one order, you see two in the future. And that's where, when you're optimizing a media campaign, it can be really helpful to look at the time horizon that goes beyond the first order, because the value of that customer may be very, very different from show to show, which would make CPA too simplistic a metric. And I see Giles already chomping at the bit to chime in.
No. I was going to make a different point. Very good. Very good.
Thank you. Wow, I passed the Giles test. It's exciting. This is going well for me.
Well, and the point you were about to make, Giles, was...
Well, no, I was just going to say something about how lifetime value is calculated and what it means, but it doesn't change Dan's point.
Do you want to, and Haley, note we're editing this section out, but do you want to add that in? Would it be beneficial?
Well, I mean, it's like, I think Dan was sort of suggesting you assume that everyone is going to, have a certain value over the whole lifetime, but like you make an assumption of like how many years worth of revenue are we going to look at, and then you bake in expected customer churn rates and pricing changes and all these different types of things into a very sort of concise estimate of customer value. It doesn't necessarily like assume that customers are going to have value over sort of a undefined number of years or something like that.
If I can chime in just to frame this conversation a little bit, just so the audience knows, this is an actual live internal debate that we're having as an organization, because I've gotten very excited about the notion that we should be advocating for the brands that we work with to pay special attention to ROAS when they may be using as their primary way of measuring success in their advertising spend. They may be using CPA or cost per order or some metric that is based on a single transaction. And what I'm making the case to the team is to say, no, I think that we'll make very different decisions if we change what our North Star is from cost per order or cost per acquisition to full return on ad spend, because I think that may lead us to different conclusions. And so there's actually a lot of debate. And in fact, we have not only Giles, who's our head of strategy and insights, and really kind of the final word on how we look at a lot of these types of issues, but, Charisse, Kyle, and Ricardo are all working directly with brands who have to make these types of strategic decisions on what KPI they're going to use as their primary metric to make decisions. And they're all saying this is a terrible idea. So
hold on. Okay. So before we get, I'm dying to dive into this and to mediate these heated conversations. However, I would love to have the foundation or the framework set initially of like potential benefits and negatives for both ROAS and CPA forms of measurement.
Can we just give Oxford Road some credit first, where the account directors are all lining up to tell the CEO what a bad idea he's got?
Yes.
Radical transparency.
Radical. No, I love this. This is a real, this is the first time we've ever done anything like this, where we're having a real world debate in public, and we don't mind hearing people or having people hear us actually not all be on the same page about some key strategies. But I think it's important, so I'm excited.
Well, and it speaks to one of our values: always come with a solution. And I think there is no lack of opinions here on what the best solution would be. So this feels like an episode of Chopped or of a singing competition where people are going to get approved or shot down in real time. However, hopefully by the end of this, we'll have an excellent summary for our audience of things that they should be considering on both sides, though we may not have a firm recommendation as an agency moving forward. For everyone, we definitely do for each of our clients individually. Okay, so without further ado, back to my main point. I'd love for you to start, Ricardo. I know Kyle and Charisse are dying to jump in on this as well, so please feel free. But let's start with a few benefits of ROAS.
Sure. I mean, I think really I can even address ROAS and CPA jointly. But it's like one of the main benefits of ROAS is that it allows you to measure the revenue that's coming in. So it's a key metric. It aligns with company goals. So if your goal is to really, drive profitability because it's a weird economic condition or market, ROAS helps you get there because you're looking directly at the revenue that's coming in. Overall, it allows you to see it's a ratio that allows you to see what shows and what properties are actually performing better than the other relative to each other. And so, as a simple metric, it's really a good way to determine what's hot, what's not, and then cancel what's not, right? And invest more in things that are working well. So that's one of the main benefits, I think, of ROAS. And really, ROAS is a ratio that allows you to compare across different media types, right? Because each media type is generating that revenue. You know what your investment in that media type was. So you could look at how did podcasts do versus streaming? How did it do versus radio? So those are some of the benefits of ROAS.
Kyle, I don't know if you are able to speak to sort of what types of companies and or brands where do you see using this measurement really well? And are there any where you don't think that this would be the right way to measure revenue or metrics?
My whole thing is what's a better indicator of weather? Temperature changes or barometric pressure? Both.
Temperature changes.
Well, exactly. It's both. And it changes, right? So in an ideal world, I want to look at everything. If I can look at ROAS in conjunction with cost per acquisition, wonderful. If I can't, we can operate under what I can do. So like oftentimes what I find is a brand new advertiser coming to us for the first time. They might not be able to wrangle up their actual revenue numbers and give it into any kind of reporting that would make any sense. And so in cases like that, and also in cases in which it's a fixed cost, getting an acquisition is finite. We know how much that is worth. There might be like a lifetime value that we could factor into that. But in those instances, I think cost per acquisition is completely normal and acceptable. If it's variable cost, if we're talking like retail where one customer can go and spend $5,000 and another customer can spend $200, that's when the ROAS becomes very, very important because we can measure the impact of a particular channel based on how much money they're actually spending on the product. But I think the reason, and I don't think it's a silly discussion, but it's like, it depends. And unfortunately is the answer to this thing is like, it depends on a number of issues. Like, I have clients where they can't even report on revenue numbers. So getting a ROAS calculation is impossible, at least unless things change.
And so for like a brand new business that doesn't necessarily know what their lifetime value would be, or some of the metrics are missing to start, is there a better path for a new business? One, and then question number two, is there a better path for like a subscription business? I guess like, are there benefits to focusing on one or the other based on type of business?
Yeah, I think subscription businesses are probably fine doing a cost per analysis. Most of the ones that I work with look at that.
Wait a second.
I saw Charisse tip her head too, is a tiny skeptic there.
Okay, Charisse, you want to take first crack?
I think I'm on the cost per acquisition team in conjunction with other metrics, right? I think if we're talking about subscription businesses, though, I do like for primary cost per acquisition, right? You want to know who up front who's going to bite, right? Now, I think it's also going to depend on what kind of tiers you have to the subscription service, right? And now then you're getting on a little bit more on the back end, right? And then you can do that kind of analysis there. But I think first and foremost, if someone hears your ad and they take action and they convert, that's the primary goal that you want to look at first. CPA.
So on a subscription business, I can scale the crap out of a client using only their CPA. I don't need to know anything about their lifetime value. I don't need to know anything like that. I can do it based on that one metric in conjunction with maybe a cost per session.
Okay. And so what if it's not a subscription business? Or sorry, Dan, I know you were speaking before Charisse.
Yeah, I thought Charisse was going to back me up on this. And I actually did. I thought this was going to be really lame because I was like, the first thing Kyle said, I agreed with completely. But like when you say that on a subscription business, CPA is sufficient and you don't need to trouble yourself with ROAS, I completely disagree because if the subscription is it can vary. The length of the subscription can vary depending on how long the customer stays or potentially the cost of the subscription. A lot of different subscription models have multiple tiers. The total dollars that the brand is going to earn from a customer can vary widely between somebody that will subscribe for 1 month and promptly cancel versus somewhere that they stick a little bit longer and they may be a customer for years. And I think to me, a lot of this argument comes down to, I think Kyle said something that was very accurate, which is the more variability there is in the potential value of the customer, the more important it is to look at ROAS. If it's a one-off sale that you need once in your life and you're done, fine, CPA. If you're a new company and you've never done this before, and ROAS is going to require you to model on lifetime value, and really you've only been operating for 4 months, so there is no known lifetime value. Okay, I get it. We have to work with what we have. However, I've seen instances time after time after time where a brand and a partner are reviewing results on a particular show. And the question is, do we cancel this show? Do we continue investing in this show? And if you're only going off of the first metric, you may be throwing out a show that is a little too high on your cost per acquisition, but may have 5 times the revenue payout when you look at ROAS of what you're comparing it against. So if you oversimplify when you don't have to, you're going to end up canceling shows that are really have the ability to make a profound positive impact on your business because you're not digging a level deeper to figure it out.
So this is, I think, when I get fired, because I'm going to say, Dan, you're my boss, but you're wrong.
Okay, give it to me.
Because I think you just said it right there. It's when you try to oversimplify, that's when you run into problems. I could have, and I do have, I have a client where you could have an average order value of $10,000 or $100. There's tremendous variability there. If you just look at ROAS, that every property would look amazing because of that one order. What you would then miss is like a week later when they return some of the product, that value goes down. Now you've made decisions off of that metric alone. So what I think we're advocating for is you really have to look at campaigns holistically. So you have to look at average order value, which we didn't even talk at the top of the meeting. What is that value per order? And look at that in conjunction with ROAS and CPA. So I think what we're advocating for is that I'm not going to convince all of my clients to move to one metric when we know that we need to look at campaigns holistically.
Okay, so if the argument is, should there be a primary, secondary, tertiary KPI that we use to make campaign decisions, I wouldn't debate with you guys. I mean, you are fired. Don't get me wrong. But it's been a good run.
I get to get Italy
not
again.
until the end.
Not
until the end of this episode.
Let me just clarify. Yes, you are fired. That being said, I don't disagree with you that we should look at multiple metrics. And, a lot of times what happens when you're in the fog of war of running advertising campaigns, you go to war with the army you have, not with the army you want. And so, yes, we all wish we could wave the wand and see every conceivable metric. But at some point, you have to simplify and you have to make choices and prioritize. Where I see big issues is for example, worked very closely with a brand who had an allowable CPA on Facebook that was less than half of what it was on satellite radio. Now, why are they willing to pay more than twice as much for an order that comes from satellite radio? Because they know that that's an affluent consumer that spends money on a subscription already and over indexes the value when you look at ROAS from what would happen when you just run a typical Facebook campaign. Because what will happen is you'll pull toward the thing that has the lowest cost per order, and you might end up killing campaigns that are really going to make the difference between success and failure if you're willing to do the work of going to the next metric. I'm not saying we can be perfectionists about it, and I do believe in lining up multiple contributing factors, but when we don't do the work to push as far as we can toward also seeing ROAS, I feel that something is left behind for the client. And no, we can't be perfect all the time, but I get on my hobby horses, like with things like second layer surveys, right? Like not everybody's going to do it, but if we know that it can be helpful in getting a better ROI for the client, I think we should try. I think that we should advocate. I think that we should have a path and data that backs that up. So do we really disagree?
And this is a little bit of a Pandora's box, but I think what you're basically saying is like, don't optimize yourself to death. And I think we can all agree that is a campaign risk, regardless of whether we're looking at things through a ROAS or a CPA, because there are things that look really efficient, but guess what? They look really efficient because all it takes is one order. Yeah. And now it's great. And it was just like a low cost, high frequency item. So I think that risk is in place no matter what you're looking at, whether it's CPA or ROAS. So I don't think that addresses that. I think when I look at the campaigns that I've worked on, I really try to think about like, how new is this business and what's the kind of service and product that we're selling? Because it's like, if you've got like a product that's $19.99 available at Walgreens and all you want to do is push brand awareness so people end up shopping at Walgreens, you just care about that ROAS just so you know how much you're investing in pushing that brand message. So you don't even need to break even. You could actually, and Charisse is nodding her head because she lived this world deeply. So Charisse can talk about this in depth. If you've got, a brand that's spending $100 million a year in advertising on TV alone, and they're a subscription service, and there's an average order value that's pretty stable, a lifetime value that's pretty stable, a churn rate that's pretty stable, then guess what? You could really focus on cost per acquisition because you kind of know what all those other variables are like. And so you can help optimize based on that whenever those other metrics kind of go off kilter. So I think it just depends on the service and the product in terms of what you can look at. And to start, I think ROAS is easy. And as your business gets more complicated, harder, I think CPA becomes really helpful.
So you actually think it's harder to get to a CPA than to a ROAS?
Yeah, it is. Because you have to have stability and you have to know your lifetime value. A lot of clients don't even know what their lifetime value is, right? Because they haven't been around long enough.
For an informed client, I almost feel like it goes CPA, and then at a certain point you can go ROAS, and then you can go back to CPA once they have all those benchmarks set. Exactly. And they know then your lifetime value, your average order value, all that stuff's built into that CPA, and you can rely on that. So that's kind of like the end goal, perhaps.
Don't you worry, though, that you do all this work to research shows that are going to make sense for an advertiser, and you explain it, you do the onboarding, you set them up for success, it goes, and then you start looking at the first wave of results. And everybody wants to treat it like digital and give, and make fast decisions, right? But don't you feel like you're wrongly convicting something or not giving it its full, day in court before, if you don't look deeper at the value of those customers? I'm always worried. I am perpetually concerned that we're going to take the time and energy and trust from a brand and get them to make an investment into a program and then have it work, but they didn't know it worked, so they went away from it, and you have to start over again. Versus, could we do a deeper level of analysis to see, hey, maybe the return on investment is actually better than anticipated because it's a higher value channel? Yeah, I see Charisse nodding.
Yeah, I agree with you. Obviously, we're kind of moving into kind of interchannel talk right now. But I'll let you finish making your point.
Well, I mean, I think that we all have to use shorthands, especially when a brand is newer to the channel. And sometimes you don't have the luxury. I mean, when we talk about the complexity, there's a few dimensions of how you arrive at ROAS. And one of those is how long does the customer stay a customer on a subscription? That's the LTV part. And sometimes you don't have enough historical data on a show to be able to bake that into your calculation. However, if the cost on a monthly basis or from the first purchase is highly variable, it seems like ROAS is probably worth trying to look at as soon as you can. But if you're not precious about this issue, if you're not really, really intentional and thoughtful about it, you can make really irrational choices. And the way that I see it getting really bad is when people are looking at cost per visit or cost per session, and then saying, oh, well, we have a blended conversion rate that works across the site from all channels. And so we're going to apply our 2% conversion rate to the cost of traffic that we're seeing from this campaign. But it turns out that traffic converts 3 times better because an influencer made a personal recommendation. You see higher conversion rates from that. So if you don't drill deeper, something's lost, and you'll end up making decisions based on sometimes false positives, sometimes false negatives. And we've seen it where some shows and networks will actually try to game the system, and they'll pump up traffic to a landing page and then be like, oh, look at all this, how's the traffic going? And if you don't know better, because you're not looking at that next level, you're going to get hoodwinked. And not everybody does that. We trust most of our partners, but we've seen it happen, right? And so, I think that my view is more that we should align around the aspiration and put the energy into trying to go as far as we feasibly can in partnership with our clients. But I know that you can't be a perfectionist about it all the time. So how far apart are we?
Well, I feel like all roads lead to Rome, and all road and all of these conversations lead back to attribution, which is really where I think the challenge comes in.
Yeah.
But I cut you off, Charisse. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. I was going to say, obviously we're talking about, in the line of using cost per order, cost per acquisition as the first line and using ROAS as a second line. I mean, we also, when we're talking about going deeper into this, we also have to be realistic with the limitations of what ROAS can provide us, right? Because it doesn't necessarily, in my experience, provide full visibility on how that campaign is doing, right? There's factors that companies can control that we as performance marketers have no control over, right? And that's going to directly impact that ROAS, right? People change their offerings, pricing structures, depending on what kind of company it is, you have sales teams that bring, that sale further down the funnel and customer retention. So those are some factors that we can't necessarily control, and we have to be cognizant of when we're looking at lifetime value or ROAS.
We do a lot of B2B at this agency. You guys probably are all working with somebody in B2B or have. And this is where this becomes a real issue, especially because with brands that service businesses, they may be able to transact with a customer for a value of like $500, but they can also transact with a customer that could be like $500,000. And so when you have that type of variability, if your primary KPI for success is CPA, you're going to pull toward the highest volume of transactions, but you may just be chasing the long tail that's going to represent 20% of your revenue rather than the big ones that can do 80%, if in fact they're bringing in marquee customers. And so that's why I say I think there's a correlation between how much variance there could be in the value of a customer and how important an issue this is. If you're talking about a 5 to 10% variance between customers, like, okay, I get it. Why make life harder than it has to be? But if it's going to be, to a factor of 10x difference between channels that look identical on CPA, but are, off by a 0 in terms of ROAS, then I think we have a duty to try to dig deeper into that to the extent that we can within the confines of our relationships. That's my thinking. I don't know if we actually disagree, but do we really disagree about this?
I think that one we agree on.
Okay.
I don't think we disagree. I think we disagree on the premise that there's one attribute to
one to
end all
solve them all.
attributes.
Yeah.
And there's not. I think where I'm hearing is usually we want to push for ROAS. It's not a deal breaker if we don't.
Yeah.
But they're not mutually exclusive, which is the best news. We can do both. Then it doesn't matter.
A lot of times we can. So if you guys had to pick, if you only had one that you had to use to rationalize decision. Okay, sorry.
Well, no, I just have a question. Like we've referenced kind of calling it too quickly a few times. And Dan, your biggest fear of walking away from a show that you didn't know was working until it was too late. Do we have any recommended time allowance when it comes to measuring each of these? And is there a difference in how much runway we give when we're trying to determine what the level of success is?
I think it depends. Unfortunately, like on the sales cycle, like you got to see how long it goes from a lead to an order or a session to a conversion. And then that varies, unfortunately.
So the way I would say it is if there's kind of two big factors that ladder up to varying ROAS. And one of those is duration of the relationship, LTV. How long are they going to stay a customer? Do they average 3 months? Do they average 12 months? And then it's the size of the transaction. How many dollars per month or how much for the total order? I would say if the principle we're all agreeing on is that the larger variance there is in LTV between customers, the more important it is to look at it. I would say the same thing about LTV, which is if you see massive differences where you've been active on a number of assets for a year or longer, and you notice that some of those assets average a 3-month lifetime value, and some of them are a 12-month lifetime value, I think lifetime value becomes increasingly important. On the other hand, if it's the difference between, an average of 4 and 4.25, like, yeah, it's incremental, it's helpful, it's nice to know, but it's not going to be as significant. So I think you have to look at what data do we already have. And, I think I'm pretty flexible about how much you require in a test period. But when somebody's been running a legacy campaign for a number of years on a channel, I think you have to at least do the analysis to see, is that variance significant or not? And the more significant, the more important it is. I would love to know everybody's favorite. If you could only get one, and I don't think we should shoot for one. I think we should shoot for 2 or 3 at least. But like, which one's your fave? What's your primary?
Yeah,
who wants to go first?
I'll go first. Just to echo, yes, I do not believe that we should only be looking at one. However, if I had to personally choose one, I would go with cost per order, cost per acquisition. I think it establishes the most level playing ground, right? And it's also the most immediate, right? You don't have to wait, however long, the cycle is to realize that return, right? And then that also, which allows you to make quicker decisions on your media strategy. And yeah, so I would choose CPO.
So I think one of the reasons why we were like, why are we having this conversation, is because I really am agnostic here. I don't care whether it's CPO or ROAS. I don't think this conversation took me to one side or the other. I see the value of both, right? And really, I think ultimately what I recommend to my customers is, one, you have to know what is important to your business. And are you just trying to scale and grow? Are you just trying to drive customers because you've got, a meeting where you have to show growth? Yeah. CPO might be a good place to focus on. Are you focused on making sure you're hitting numbers because the economy's wonky again and you have to show profitability? Okay, let's focus on ROAS. So it really depends on your business. But more importantly, whatever KPI you choose, give me a target. I love that. I want to have a goal that I can measure against. But I also want to measure things and campaigns as a portfolio, right? Because I'm gonna include some properties that are over goal, and I'm gonna include some properties that are really, really efficient. And the reason for that is because I want those really big properties that are going to be less efficient just because they're more expensive, but they've got massive reach. Those are going to drive volume, and it's okay if those are over your KPI goal. And some of the smaller ones just need to be really efficient to balance out the ones that are over goal, right? So I'm really buying a portfolio of properties here to make sure that I'm hitting your goals and also helping you scale. That's what I care about.
Kyle, agree, disagree, all of the above?
No, I mean, Ricardo nailed it. I think that was perfect. If I had to pick one, I would say ROAS, only because it gives me more information that I could dig in. Yes, Dan, you're welcome. If I had to pick one, but echoing the sentiment of everybody else before me, I'm just give me as much data as possible and we'll do it and take into consideration. What Ricardo is saying is huge. It's never one line item, and I never look at like optimizing our campaigns by line item. It's how they work together and how, we balance efficiency and volume. That's our job, and to give those recommendations and however many KPIs we can track to get there, I'm down. But
now that Kyle's LTV at Oxford Road is exponentially higher based on joining Team Dan, I'd love to hear from Giles, the strong silent type on this conversation. Where do you weigh in?
I've been so impressed by all of the points that have been made, and Charisse has made a great case for CPA, and so has Ricardo under the right circumstances. And I definitely agree. There are things we don't have control over. I definitely agree. It really depends on the circumstances of your business. So there is no one right answer. I do agree that ROAS on balance is a deeper metric that is ultimately probably preferable. But I just want to have a quick rant about short-termism in marketing. And Harvard Business Review have ranted about this. Martin Sorrell has ranted about it. Les Binet and Peter Field have ranted about.
There's only one Martin we care about here.
And Giles Martin is a bigger figure in global marketing than Martin Kroll.
Right.
Let's just be clear about this.
Yes.
But since the digital era, it's easy to run campaigns with really, really small budgets. And it's easy to run campaigns that are really, really, really targeted. And campaigns that are really, really targeted or have really, really small budgets tend to generate much higher ROIs or ROAS, or maybe lower cost per acquisitions as well. And as I was ranting the other day with the guys about, like, ROI is a fraction, it's a ratio, it's a function of the denominator. So you can have a campaign with a very, very low budget and get a really high ROI, but you might only make $10 with that campaign. It's a bit of an extreme example, $100 or $1,000. But you could run a much bigger campaign that had a much lower ROI, and you could make $10 million from that campaign. So ultimately, all businesses should really be focused on ultimately profitability. And if there was one metric to end them all, it's about profitability. And there's been this huge rise in short-termism focused on, getting a high ROI because it looks good today, it looks good this week, it allows you to hit your quarterly numbers, but it may not be what's best for the overall growth of your business over the year or over a 2-year, 5-year, 10-year time period. So I think it's really important to consider that stuff. And it really, Ricardo's saying another version of the same thing, is like balancing, acquisition and versus scale. But that's really the big conversation here, I would say. And maybe we do that another week.
Yeah, I think we definitely should have that conversation another week, mostly because we're out of time, but also because it's a very valuable conversation. I think excellent opinions on both sides of the aisle here. Dan, I agree. I think we're much closer together than we are further apart, but as our faithful leader here, we'd love for you to have sort of final remarks as we close out the episode.
It's a good debate. Clearly, the answer is ROAS. I think we've established that beyond a shadow of a doubt here. I don't.
He says as he mutes everyone else on the call.
I think that Giles is also right that you could go deeper still, and getting people to think long term about advertising decisions is the challenge of our business, right? And it's a challenge of like all humanity, right? Do you go for instant gratification and potentially have small sample sizes and imprecise data, or do you do the work and do you endure in investments that may take a longer time to pay back? What I can say as a business owner is that I have done many analyses on Oxford Road and said, okay, are we a healthier business when we have more clients signing up, or when we have a shorter list that we can derive a higher lifetime value from or a higher ROAS on? And I have years where our record year where we had the most active clients sign up with us actually turned into our worst revenue year. And we've had years that our best revenue years, we had the fewest number of clients. And that's why I just know from my own, personal experiences, there can be a folly in chasing volume if the value of those customers can vary significantly. And so it's an important thing to be thoughtful about. All joking aside, Ricardo, you're not fired today. But what I really appreciate is that we have leaders at this agency who are working on behalf of brands that don't just drink the Kool-Aid and accept every party line, and that the fact that you guys are willing to sit here and, take me on, push back and state your view. I think at the end of the day, this is probably going to be an issue where we don't all say the same thing on every call. And I think that's okay. We are entitled to have different points of view. And I think what's most important to me is that whoever is representing our business to the market, that you're able to look at both sides of an issue shoulder to shoulder with the clients we serve and help think through it with them so they come to the right conclusion. And if we can suspend our own biases coming into that to try to give a thoughtful, open discussion that shares the pros and cons of different approaches, I think that's a wonderful thing. So I'm just grateful for you guys that you're willing to come here and push back and say what you think, because at the end of the day, the type of organization we are, we have to have strong points of view, and you're never going to have uniformity across the board when people actually are able to speak for themselves and be thoughtful. So I think this is awesome.
Then you'll be totally fine with Ricardo and Kyle saying you're dead wrong in chat.
Well, first of all, Kyle completely agrees with me, and I think Ricardo does too. I just don't think he wants to admit it, but that's fine.
Well, then, Charisse, Ricardo, Kyle, Giles, Dan, thank you all for joining the Media Roundtable. This podcast is brought to you by Oxford Road, where we want you to succeed in audio and to use your influence for good. As members of the marketing community, we have the power to advance voices that don't just entertain, but edify, to build bridges instead of burning them, and to rise above our differences and show that collaboration is possible when we treat each other with respect. If you're a marketer looking to align your vision, reach out to our agency, Oxford Road, by visiting oxfordroad.com and subscribing to our newsletter, The Influencer. Thank you to Bianca, Kyle here, Haley, the team at Podcast One, and as always, influence responsibly.